Welcome to the Power of Nature podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Waldo. In this show, I talk about how connecting with nature and the natural world can create amazing and immeasurable benefits for us and in our lives. I share stories of my experiences doing this as part of a regular and ongoing practice, and I talk to others about their experiences with the power of nature as well. So join me as we go on a journey of learning about the power of nature and the impact that it can have on our own lives. Welcome back to the Power of Nature podcast. In today's episode, I'm talking about so many of the things that nature can teach us when we open up to the lessons that are right there in front of our eyes. So let's go ahead and dive in. Today's a hot day in Montana. I think it's one of the hottest, and we've been feeling the heat lately. I went out to feed my horses, and I fed them, and then I wanted to move them over to another pasture, but I kind of had this downtime. I had already given them hay, so I was just giving them some of their supplements and other things in buckets and feed tubs, and so I wanted them to finish that, and then I was going to move them over to a pasture that has more shade and more grass for them to spend the day. But I was waiting for them to finish, so I kind of had this downtime, this kind of lag time, this kind of it's not enough really time to go inside and get started on anything else, but I also don't just want to stand here in the sun and just wait because it's hot and dry and it didn't feel so good. So I felt just a small kind of idea percolate, which was just go for a little walk. And I wasn't really sure what that meant. So I just started walking down our driveway. And I looked around. We have this cat that we call Ranch Kitty that hangs out at our house. I looked around for her or him. Actually, I don't know if it's a he or a she. I think it's a she. But I didn't see the cat. I walked down the driveway and I decided to check the fence, and I did that. And then I felt like I just kind of let myself meander. What does meander mean to me? To me, meandering was just kind of just doing whatever, kind of just killing time, going to whatever kind of pulled my attention, not in a strong way, but just like, oh, I'll just go over here. Oh, I'll just go over there. It was that kind of a thing. And what I ended up doing is going into the horse pasture where I was planning to turn my horses out after they're done eating. And I walked through the one part, which is the part that my husband, he's really enjoyed sitting in and just taking in nature. And I didn't feel like just sitting there. I wasn't sure. So I kind of meandered some more. The horses weren't done yet. I could kind of see that. It hadn't been enough time. I didn't have enough time to go, like when I go and sit in my favorite spot in the woods that I love to go to, I usually go there for a long time. So I knew I wanted to get the horses, when they were done, into this other pasture. So I didn't really have enough time to do that. So I kind of meandered around. I just kind of walked through the pasture. I'm just kind of looking at things, very light. I don't want to say objective, but it was more like just killing time, just letting myself go wherever I was going to go, and just kind of being open and like meandering. And so it's interesting because I found myself walking in this one part of the pasture that is one of my favorite parts of that pasture that I discovered accidentally. It's actually a part of the pasture that has a view of the mountains that is spectacular from our property. And I had never known it existed. I actually talked about this in my podcast called Adventures in Horse Ranching, starting a small horse ranch in Montana, because it was in the experience of setting up our property that I discovered this spot. And I had been all over our property and I had no idea it existed until I discovered it. And how did I discover it? Well, and I talk about this in the podcast, and in it I describe how I was working on this fencing project, and it was a really hot day, and I was exhausted, and it was hard to know what to do, and it was hard to kind of figure out how to do this fencing. We had never set up fencing from scratch, and we're kind of trying to do it kind of on our own, but with this guy that was going to be, putting posts in for us. And there's just so many decisions, and it was so overwhelming, and it was so confusing. And there was a moment where in the midst of all of that, I had felt just so exhausted and so depleted and so hot. I think it had been several days by that point of doing this every day, day in and day out, and not knowing if we were making the right decisions about fencing and having no idea how to really do what we were doing. I mean, like I said, we'd never set up fencing from scratch, and where we're using the right materials, and did we do the right layout, and oh my gosh, all this stuff. So it was in the midst of all that, really hot, and I decided I was just like so depleted that I had sought out some shade kind of ahead. The guys that were the people that were working for us, that were helping us with putting in the wooden posts, they kind of knew where they were going, and they kind of didn't really need me there for a moment. So I just kind of stepped back and sought out some shade. And I found this spot that just seemed like a little bit of a oasis of shade in the midst of an endless desert of hot, dry, beating down sun and frustration and challenge. And here was this little oasis of shade by these trees. And I just kind of like went there, and I looked around me as I kind of just took in the shade, and I just kind of breathed a sigh of relief to get some like relief from everything that was happening. I looked up and I saw the mountains that we have a view of from our property, but this particular angle, this particular view, the lens through which I was looking at this moment, at this place, this particular spot, gave me a view through the trees of the mountains that I'd not seen before. And it's like it was a view that I just love deep in my heart. Like I love looking at mountains, but there are certain views that I just am like, oh, that really speaks to me. Oh my gosh, that just really feels so right. And that's what this spot was like. And I was just mesmerized by it. I just couldn't even believe that there was this spot on our property that I happened upon in what felt like just one of my most depleted, exhausted, throw in the towel, I don't know what the heck we're doing moments of doing this fencing project. And here it was, this amazing gift of this view. what ended up happening is I sat there and I took it in, and it was amazing. And I told my husband about it. And we even took to putting some chairs there afterwards and sitting there. I would go there and sit and just take in the mountains. I especially love that view when the mountains have snow on them still. At this time of the year, the snow is all melted where we live, so you don't see the snow. But at the time that we did the fence, you could see snow at the very top. And so often since then, I think that was 2022. Yeah, I have gone out and just stood in that spot. And it's like I would have never discovered it had I not been in that state that caused me to just look for some relief. Which, in talking about this, it's like so much of what I have discovered about nature is that there is such power in nature to help us see and experience things that it's like we couldn't see before. We maybe hadn't just been able to just see these things that are there, but that somehow are out of our purview in the moment. But they're there available for us via nature. And when we allow ourselves to want to connect and want to experience some kind of relief or some kind of sense of feeling better, that it can come when we give in to that and follow just what feels a little better in that moment. And that's what happened then. And that's what I talked about in the Adventures in Ranching podcast, but with some new insights today, because I always find that I get more understanding of our connection with nature as I spend more time in it, and how not to just happen upon it, but how to engage in and tune into the power of nature with more intention, because I realize how amazingly beneficial it is. And so here I was today in that spot, recalling that. I had just been killing time, meandering through our pasture. But here's the amazing thing. That alone, and just being in that spot again and looking up and recalling that experience I had 2 years ago of discovering this spot on the property would have been amazing enough. But I find that when we tune into nature in this way and we just allow ourselves to kind of connect with what is there is such abundance of more and more. And that is what I experienced today. I stood in that spot and I was just feeling how blessed I was that I had discovered that spot 2 years before, and that we have this spot on our property and how it happened. I was marveling at all of that. And then it's like my awareness went to other things. I walked over and I saw a birch tree that is behind this spot, kind of behind into the side. And I saw some, evergreen trees, conifer trees. I don't know if it's a pine or fir. I don't know. I'm not an expert at trees. Some kind of evergreen, not with leaves, but with some kind of needles. And it just, I looked up through, like kind of standing at the base, and I looked up, and this is a really big tree. I don't know how tall, but really tall. And I looked up through the branches, kind of from standing closer to the trunk, and it was just like, it's another thing. Like, I've seen this tree, I've driven past this tree, going down our driveway. I've walked past this tree. I've stood next to the tree. But it's suddenly like today I had access to seeing the tree in a new way. And in seeing the tree in a new way, I wasn't trying to see the tree in a new way. I just happened to be there in this meandering kind of state, and then appreciating this other view that, as I described, I had discovered. And I end up just standing under this tree and just seeing this amazingly beautiful scene. Like, if I was a photographer, I would take a photograph of just what these branches look like from below. It's just it was so breathtaking. It was so beautiful. Just the way the sky looked through the branches of the tree, the power of the branches of the tree. I could somehow feel like the age and the strength of the tree, just by without knowing. I don't really know about trees. I don't have scientific knowledge of what lets you know how old a tree is, but I just knew. I could feel the age and the wisdom of this tree. It's like I was connecting into it and feeling it. Such is the power of nature. And in doing so, I felt such awe, such a sense of marvel, peace, beauty. And then, as is often the case, my attention just kind of moved on, and I noticed this birch tree that I've seen. We have some birch trees on our property, and this one is very tall. And I was noticing again what, like, a knowing of just, I think it must be really old. I felt like it must be really old. It's seen a lot of weather changes. It's seen a lot of things. And I've seen a lot of birch trees in our area kind of I don't want to say suffer, but like kind of come down, branches come down, or, big trunks come down because of the weather here in the winter with the snow. And this tree, though, I could feel has just such strength and resilience in its trunk. But what's interesting is that there were these kind of big pieces of the tree that had fallen to the ground. And I looked up and I saw where they had come off of the top of the tree. And I don't know if it was somebody before us that cut them off for some reason, because it kind of almost looked like that. Or it could be that literally they just were so laden with snow that they broke off and then fell to the ground. But it's almost like there was this whole section of the tree trunk where these kind of sub branches or, sub parts of the trunk that kind of went up though. And there were like 5 or 6 that were just kind of like, almost looked like they'd just been cut off right at the top. And I felt a sense of sadness that those branches of the tree were not going higher, because they obviously had been, and then they had either been cut or fallen off. But the moment that I felt that, it's like somehow in just being open, it's like my awareness went to, I wasn't looking for solutions, but it's like I suddenly became aware that on each of those branches of the tree where they had kind of been cut or fallen off, there were all these other new shoots from the branches that were coming off, new, reaching up to the sky, thriving, growing, fully energized and full of life. And I thought, wow, isn't that amazing? Even when man has cut the trees down, or nature and a storm has caused another aspect of nature to transform, there is still always and can be new energy, or not new energy, but existing energy that creates anew. And that is really the sense that I got, was like, I was feeling sad about the branches and feeling like, oh, poor tree. And the message I got from the tree was like, don't feel bad. Look at these other branches, these other new shoots that are coming up. And what I also realized is that it's like those branches that fell down, that were on the ground, they become this amazing gift to maybe, bugs and squirrels and birds, even to me, because in one of my podcasts, I've talked about how I have a piece of like a birch, I call it a skin. It's like that outer part of a birch branch that I found on the ground, and I have it in my office, and it is so beautiful. It's so, so beautiful. I have it right on my window ledge, and it's like a gift. And these branches that are down on the ground that fell are like gifts to the ground and to the squirrels, or to the birds, or just to the bugs, or to me, or to other people walking by. And such is the power of nature. And nature is full of so many solutions, so many things that just I think we as humans, we can get caught up in like thinking we need to get involved and we need to fix things because it's something that we've, myself very much included, have been taught to do. Oh, you need to fix this thing, or you need to make this thing, or you need to do this thing. But so many times what I've come to learn as I've listened more to my own wisdom and listened to the wisdom of nature is that nature has a divine wisdom already within it that we often can't see, that is part of a larger picture that benefits the all. In ways that we, with our not as expansive view, because we can't just see and understand everything. Not that we can't, but we often don't tune into the knowing of nature to be able to understand and let it be and flow and appreciate the wisdom of it. I corrected myself there because I don't want to imply that we are lacking, because I have come to understand that we are not. We just have learned certain practices and have had certain limited perspectives that we often don't see the full picture. What I find, though, is that the more that I open up to the power of nature in the ways that I talk about and in the ways that I've learned to do, that I become more aware. I become more aware of what nature does and how much more. It's like I get more glimpses of how it's all working out in ways that I couldn't see based on where my focus had previously been. It's almost like I was zoomed in on one thing and it looked like a problem, but when I tune into the power of nature, it's almost like, and I tune into that wisdom, I suddenly see things from a bigger vantage point, and I see how all is actually well. That what may seem like a problem, like a branch having fallen, is not the problem that I may be thinking it is in that moment. Because maybe that branch is part of a gift to the ground, or to a bird, or to a squirrel, or to me. And then new shoots come off of where that branch came from. What I find is that the more that I tune into nature, I become aware of this. I become aware, and in becoming aware of nature's knowing way of being, not only does it affect me in the moment and I see things and I know things in a way that are like, wow, I never saw it like that. Oh my gosh, I can see it's all kind of working out. I find that that is stuff that I carry over into other parts of my life. I find that maybe later on in the day, I go somewhere and I might have seen a problem and been bothered by it. But somehow, today, that day, after tuning into the power of nature, I have a different perspective. And that perspective is one that allows me to not kind of see that problem and drill in on it and try to fix it, because I realize that there's maybe really not the problem that I thought was going on at all. Maybe, like the branch that fell from the birch tree, it's a gift. It's something that's part of a larger plan. And I find myself letting it be. This kind of experience also leads to me just kind of having more patience and kindness with myself, and patience and kindness with others, with other people, situations, animals, anything. It's like I don't get caught up in the smaller view of what's going on. And instead, I can see that there often can be a larger purpose that is happening. And that the larger purpose is actually still one of well-being and goodness for all that are involved. At one point on my walk this morning, I went over to a tree and I saw feathers. And I thought, oh no. At first I thought they were maybe feathers from our chickens, because my husband in one section of our pasture had taken our chicken manure and put it in there, and so there were some feathers, but this is too far from there, and these were not chicken feathers. I don't know what bird they were from, but they weren't chickens, and they didn't look like the color of our chickens. So I knew they were some kind of a bird. And I remember years ago, I kind of feel like when I was starting to listen more to myself, I've always been a softie towards animals and wildlife, and I would feel and experience such pain when I would see like an animal that was dead on the road. And it would be really hard to kind of not be affected by it. And here now, fast forward, many, 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 many years later, I'm standing and looking at these feathers. I didn't see any other part of the bird, but it was clear that there were feathers, and probably the other parts of the bird had been eaten by something. And I felt myself go into this state of sadness for the bird. Something had eaten it. Something had eaten it. And I was really bummed out about it. But I stood there for a moment and I looked at the trees around me, and I felt the slightest breeze, and it kind of connected in not intentionally, but just by standing and pausing for a moment. It's almost like nature knocked on the door of my awareness. That's kind of what it felt like. Because one minute I was feeling sadness, and the next moment I just stood there. I let myself just pause. And it's like the wisdom of nature knocked on my awareness. And I'd had a closed door in sorrow and fear and pain about the bird. But suddenly, the wisdom of nature knocked on my door. And I had an awareness come to me, which is the exact spot where I was standing, is exactly below where I have seen this one hawk that lived on our property perch. The hawk was part of a hawk family, and every year we've had a hawk family in our property, and it's amazing. They just make such sounds, and they're so beautiful to watch. And it seems that the 4th of July every year they disappear. And so the hawk family is no longer, it's after the 4th of July. So the hawk family, I've not seen them, no evidence of them once again. But while they were here on our property, it's kind of like they were part of our family. And that's because I would just go out and I would see them, and they would just fly around, and it was almost like, where are the hawks? And I had dreamed for so long of being able to have that kind of thing. And, we have that on our property, this amazing hawk family. And so I've had a lot of reverence for these hawks. And many times I've marveled at seeing the one hawk sit up in this tree. And I've been able to see get pretty close to it in terms of from the ground, but the tree is really big, so it's pretty high up. But being able to see just how big it is. It's actually this same hawk family that I've talked about in the show, where at one point when our horses weren't in this pasture, the hawks were, or one of them, or I don't know how many of them, were sitting on the fence posts. And then one day there was a hawk that just must have been on the fence post, and I drove my car up right next to it, and it was like the hawk was flying right next to my driver's seat, right next to me in the driver's seat, literally right there. And then another one flew over, and it was this amazingly magical experience. And I love hawks. And so I have a deep love and appreciation for hawks. And I know, they have their predators, and they have, they eat. And yet I have reverence for all the birds on our property, the tiniest birds and the biggest birds. And so here I was today, standing, finding these feathers at the base of the tree, a tree in the pasture, feeling sadness. And then it's like nature knocked on. Like the door of my awareness, and reminded me that this is the tree that one of the hawk family members would sit in. And I realized, with a sense of knowing in that moment, that it is very likely that this bird whose feathers I was seeing today had been part of a meal of the hawk. I love the hawk, and I love all the other birds. And for a long time, I would struggle to kind of rectify even though I love birds that are predators, I kind of tried to look away from and ignore when another bird or another animal is its prey. But as nature often reminds me and reminded me again today, when I focus in on the bird that's lost its life, to likely the hawk, I'm often seeing something with a much smaller lens than the larger kind of beauty and magnitude of what is really going on. I don't know the story of the bird that was a meal for the hawk, most likely. But I know enough to know that there is great wisdom in nature, and that many times, or more than many, all of the time, when we allow ourselves to become aware of nature, we can see that it pulses with its own plan that is one, that allows abundance and new growth and expansion. And I've even come to understand that that means that the things that do not, quote unquote, survive actually also serve a purpose too. Now, I know about the cycle of life. It's not like I don't. Of course, that's taught. But I think it's one thing to know it mentally, and it's another thing to be in reverence of it energetically and within your heart, because you really understand it and just how there is massive well-being that is part of a larger plan. And such is the case with today. And what I find is that the more and more and more that I tune into nature and I allow myself to be open to and to actively engage in a desire to connect with nature and its power without expectation, without trying to control it or needing a certain thing. When I am in that state, when I practice that state or I choose that state, and I ask myself to experience that, what I find is that nature always shows me exactly what is right for me in that moment. It's like I learn from nature things relevant to the larger world and things relevant to my life in that exact moment. Questions. I'm trying to understand getting answers to questions that I've long had that I thought I would never get, that I kind of gave up on, and then I suddenly realize the exact things that I think what my deepest heart and soul really, truly want. That is always what I get. Always. And such is the power of nature. So that is what I wanted to talk about for today's episode, and I will end on that note. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Power of Nature podcast. To learn more about me and my other offerings, you can visit my website at michellewaldo.com. That's MICHELLEWALDO.com.